Hello, and welcome to episode number 4 of Living in the Sprawl, Southern California's most adventurous podcast. I am your humble correspondent, Jon Steinberg, and this week we wanted to highlight the culinary history of this rich and fertile region, and we thought the best way to do that would be to highlight a number of seemingly eternal culinary options, places that have each been around for longer than 50 years. And oftentimes when we're talking about old school vintage restaurants, an unfortunate byproduct of that discussion is that the cuisine, the recipes, none of that has been updated in any way, shape, or form to adhere to the moment. So, lots of places that could have wound up on this list will not appear, frankly because they aren't that great. The food tastes as though it were created in 1930, not merely created inside of a restaurant, which happened to be founded around that same time. In the case of the 10 businesses that we will be showcasing this evening, I've had a chance to dine at each of them, and I'm happy to report these establishments are indeed worth your time. So, any attempt to properly assemble such a list is going to incorporate some different kinds of establishments. On this list, you will see remnants of old school theme parks and restaurants that used to cater to the stars. You'll see it all within these 10 selected businesses. So, let's go ahead and get it started here. Number 10, Mrs. Knott's Chicken Dinners in Buena Park, California. This began its lengthy lifespan in the year of our Lord, 1934, when Cordelia and Walter Knott had begun to sell fruit, chiefly different types of berries and other similar products such as jam. And when the couple saw the proverbial light, they decided to take Cordelia's phenomenal recipe for chicken mainstream. Initially, the offerings at Mrs. Knott's Chicken Dinners started with seatings of 8, more like an old school version of a tasting menu, where there's only one course, it seems. And word quickly spread. Soon enough, Cordelia Knott was entertaining legions of fans with her phenomenal fried chicken recipe. Now, I had an opportunity to dine at this establishment last year and can attest that though the recipe may be flirting with 90 years in existence, the food was as dynamic, tasty, and lovingly crafted as I'm sure that it was when Cordelia herself was alive to dish out her iconic chicken dinners to the masses during her lifetime. Really wonderful experience, and I was so pleased that the place hadn't lost a step in any way, shape, or form. Part of what got me to go there was this completely entertaining Huell Hauser video, where, for those of you who don't know, Huell Hauser, he worked for PBS for decades and decades, essentially doing what we're trying to do here on this podcast in many ways. He was basically a professional adventurer. So he would go down the coast and up the coast and in all directions, exploring all things California. And he had a particular adoration for the culinary side of the state. And there's nothing more that he loved than a true gem like Mrs. Knott's Chicken Dinner. So that is an episode I highly recommend. You can find it on YouTube. It is as entertaining as anything you will see. And again, ecstatic to report that the cuisine has stood the test of time, and a meal in 2021 is, I'm sure, just as good as it was in 1934 when the first chicken dinners were served out of this kitchen in Buena Park, California. So, number 10, Mrs. Knott's Chicken Dinners. Ninth on this list of vintage restaurants that are actually worth your time, we travel down to Long Beach, hoping against hope that we are, like Sublime, well qualified to represent the LBC, as we tell you about Jost'S, a phenomenal sports bar / brew pub / amazing place to get a bite to eat. So this establishment began actually in Newport Beach, my hometown, on the Balboa Peninsula, where for 4 years, Jost'S, who was actually a human being, he sold sundry items, cigarettes, ice cream, candy, that kind of stuff. Yeah, right there on the peninsula. But looking for more space and a bigger client outreach, he moved the business to Anaheim Street in Long Beach City, where he quickly gained a rabid following, which couldn't get enough of the burgers, pretzels, fries, and simple but elevated pub food sold on the premises. I actually went to this establishment on the 4th of July 2 years ago. It was the day when the big kind of earthquake came about. Anyway, again, I am ecstatic, elated, on cloud nine, super excited to report that this burger was a knockout. And I'm not just saying that at all. It really was rather spectacular. The ambiance is second to none. If you're looking for a kind of dive bar experience without, how to say this nicely, the typical repeat customers at a dive bar, then this is an establishment that you might want to look into. As old school as it gets, but delightful food in a fun setting, and there are no vestiges of pretense going on in here. You can be yourself. You can chug back a Heffenweisen if you so choose, but you can also enjoy a truly excellent bar burger. So, number 9 from the LBC, Snoop Dogg's LBC, Jost'S. Check it out. For number 8, we take a scenic drive down to San Juan Capistrano, where we stroll into a building that dates all the way back to the 1790s. Currently the Adobe since 1948. This property, though, at one point was a jail and at another point became a post office before being purchased by Clarence Brown in 1946. The restaurant opened its doors in 1948 as El Adobe and quickly gained a foothold in the community as a great option for authentic Mexican food. And in 1955, Brown actually sold the business to the Fred Harvey Company. El Adobe, in addition to having a phenomenal location, this restaurant is directly around the corner from the Mission San Juan Capistrano, which is arguably the most gorgeous mission out of all of them, but it has the distinct honor of being the favored dining destination of President Richard Milhous Nixon and his wife Pat. There's actually a presidential booth that I had the chance to eat at, and a suggested meal, which Mr. Nixon and his wife used to order on their trips to El Adobe. And it's kind of fun sitting in the same exact chairs in which the former president and first lady sat, envisioning the pair dining on enchiladas and sipping margaritas. because this is, of course, post-Watergate, and there's something ironic and yet utterly fascinating about all of that. As an aside, the food here was really stellar. Everything that you are looking for from an old-school Mexican restaurant. There are a number of fantastic Mexican places in Los Angeles that I know about. Definitely some in Orange County, but for some reason, this particular restaurant stood out to me both for its historical entanglements, but then also the fact that it still delivers one hell of a meal 50, 60 years on. And there's something to be appreciated about such a long-term commitment to tremendous food on a daily basis. So, one of the old school places that is actually worth your time can definitely be found in the seaside town of San Juan Capistrano, where you will find El Adobe. At number 7, Glendale's iconic Tam O'Shanter. This long-enduring prime rib-focused eatery began its reign in 1922 as owners Lawrence Frank and Walter Vandekamp put forth a classic menu of prime rib, creamed corn, creamed spinach, and of course, what would such a meal be without Yorkshire pudding? This was the same family that ultimately also started similarly iconic prime rib establishment Lowry's a couple years later. But I wanted to highlight the Tam O'Shanter as a true example of a kind of Los Angeles experience that has been had now literally for almost 100 years. Inside of the Tam O'Shanter, there is a plaque dedicated to Walt Disney. The plaque stands above the booth where he so often sat, because the location here is not that far from where the original Walt Disney Corporation had its headquarters. And this was his spot. He loved coming in, ordering the prime rib and Yorkshire pudding, and spitballing ideas with business partners before making decisions that would ultimately lead to world-scale changes in the entertainment industry. Yes, this has been a Hollywood favorite spot for quite some time, and a hefty amount of famous actors, producers, theater people, all people within the entertainment industry have had a night at the Tam O'Shanter, and most of them have lived to tell tremendous tales about that particular night. I have dined there a couple of times, once with my fiance, her family, and it was the first time when my father met her father and mother. So it does hold a bit of personal weight for me. But it's on here because of its continued commitment to offering prime rib excellence, that Yorkshire pudding still reigns supreme in any discussion about dishes that need to accompany a phenomenal prime rib. The Tam O'Shanter has the history, it has the glamour, and most importantly, it has that excellent prime rib. That's what you're there for. And to pay your respects to Walt Disney, the human being, not the mythical, godlike figure who seems to fly above 2021 Hollywood. He was an actual person. I've said it on another episode, but the guy seriously ate here, and there is a damn good reason why he did. Terrific food. Still the case. Tam O'Shanter, number 7 on our list. For number 6, we head back down to Orange County, where we decide to stop in for a malt shake and an old-time hamburger at Watson Drugs and Soda Fountain. This extremely special, unique establishment has been around since 1899, making it the oldest soda fountain of its kind in the state of California. And they have a plaque there to prove it that I've actually seen. Here in downtown Orange, pretty close to Chapman University is where this is located. You have the opportunity to get some splendid sandwiches, burgers, things of that sort. But where this particular business truly excels, truly makes its money, is with their malt shakes. I can personally attest that the malt shake made right here at Watson Drugs and Soda Fountain is among the best that you will likely ever have in your entire life. It's transformative, it's special, it is transcendent. And I don't use those words lightly. This business also played a role in the 1990s Tom Hanks directed classic That Thing You Do, where we do have a scene that was shot at the soda fountain, because it really does look like something that you would have found in the 1950s, which is when the movie was meant to take place. And I mean, other shots in the film were also helmed in nearby Orange. It has a real old school vibe to it, and no better trip, return to the past for a Marty McFly style soda fountain outing than the one that can be had in 2021 at Watson Drugs and Soda Fountain in Orange, California. We here at Living in the Sprawl podcast had a spectacular experience at this restaurant and highly recommend it to those of you interested in some old school fun. At number 5, we take you to the desert, more specifically to Palm Springs. Melvyn'S, number 5, on our list of the 10 best old school vintage restaurants that are actually worth your time. So Melvyn'S began its journey in 1975. It was started by a gentleman named Mel Haber at the Ingleside Inn. The restaurant quickly gained a reputation for its robust celebrity clientele, as the Rat Pack favored the spot as a hangout when they would all be in Palm Springs at the same time. Other actors and entertainment industry luminaries frequented the restaurant, which was known for some of its more ambitious dishes, such as the Steak Diane. That is the dish where they take your steak and they light it on fire, and it's really a show more than anything, but definitely would have appealed to Mr. Sinatra and his friends. I actually had a chance to have a meal at Melvyn'S the week before the coronavirus closed everything, and it was a terrific experience. We opted for the Steak Diane, and it came out on fire with that incredible sauce. And then the dessert, which was the Baked Alaska, was a certifiable home run. Just hit it out of the park, and it wasn't even close to staying in bounds. So this place has style for days, even though Frank Sinatra is no longer with us, and it maybe caters to a different sort of clientele as of now. Its exciting, quirky history is fully on display by the photographs on the walls, frankly, the dishes on the menu, and the vibe going on inside of Melvyn'S. A truly wonderful throwback experience to a time when lighting a steak on fire was part of the process. So, at number 5, Melvyn'S in Palm Springs. Number 4, San Bernardino's Mitla Cafe. This restaurant began its journey in 1937 when Lucia Rodriguez opened up this iconic spot near Route 66 in the city of San Bernardino. As was covered to an extent in the last episode where we addressed the founding of Taco Bell, it was the popularity of Mitla Cafe that so intrigued Glenn Bell that he essentially stole their thunder, so to speak, and kind of took their methods as far as making tacos and distributing them and turned it into an empire the likes of which any taco company has never seen before or since. But with the folks at Mitla, they stayed true to their overall mission. And 80 plus years later, I'm happy to report that this is still a family-owned company, which Taco Bell has not been a family-owned company in 40 years. So it's a truly special family saga, a love affair with a restaurant and a community, their particular love affair with this establishment. This is one of those ultra rare examples of a community and a restaurant being on the same page for decade after decade after decade. You could go, as I did, to Mitla Cafe today, and you would receive the same outstanding tacos, burritos, enchiladas, refried beans, and rice that you would have received 70 years ago. It's incredible when restaurants like this are able to keep on churning out excellent, cutting-edge food that makes customers come back smiling repeatedly. I don't know if the same can be said for Taco Bell. But the Mitla Cafe is a wonderful, wonderful place, and I'm so proud to have it here on our list of the 10 best old school vintage restaurants that are actually worth your time at number 4. For our third spot on this list, we travel yet again up the coast, this time to Santa Barbara, to have some of Julia Child's favorite tacos in the entire world. We're going to be highlighting La Super-Rica, a local yet nationally known iconic taco stand, kind of far away from the beach in Santa Barbara, but for anyone in the know, this is the place you're going when you want spectacular homemade tortillas and some of the best ingredients to flood those tortillas with that you are liable to find north of the border. You would think that a Los Angeles taco spot might have appeared on this list. We did mention the Mitla Cafe, and I do want to prepare listeners for a volume 2 when the topics are particularly fascinating. So there is a chance that down the road you may hear about your particular favorite taco spot in a different part of Southern California. But when we asked 10 locals, all 10 informed us that yes, in fact, the hype is real, and La Super-Rica is that darn good. So, with Julia Child to thank, and a wonderful spot nestled in the heart of Santa Barbara, but not on the beach, so you don't have to contend with way, way too many tourists. I think this is an absolute home run. And in a city that's lesser known for its cuisine than maybe some of the other surrounding areas, this is a great example to dine at the quintessential Santa Barbara establishment. If it was good enough for Miss Julia Child, then I have no earthly doubt that it will be good enough for any of you beautiful listeners. So, at number 3, Santa Barbara's La Super-Rica. Our number 2 entrant into this list comes to us by way of the Inland Empire again. The Sycamore Inn, which is located in Rancho Cucamonga, which I lovingly refer to as the Cook, although my fiance despises it. This establishment first opened in 1939. The property has a fairly interesting history dating back to the 18th century. Buildings were on this property. This was actually directly in the pathway of Route 66. So, with the convenient location for pre-automobile times, lots of people had the opportunity to frequent the Sycamore Inn, including Marilyn Monroe was said to have eaten here, and that eternal Los Angeles paramour, Elizabeth Short, was also said to have had one of her last meals at the Sycamore Inn. This is as old school as it gets. Waiters dress up nice in bow ties, slacks, and you're going to get the whole treatment at a place like this. I actually had the pleasure of dining at this establishment right before we went into serious lockdown, and I was treated to a great ribeye, and my fiance also loved her food, especially the baked potato. Your typical old school meat and potatoes establishment right on Route 66, home of infamy, I guess, because Marilyn Monroe and Elizabeth Short decided to dine there. But definitely a landmark restaurant for denizens of the 909. The Sycamore Inn holds a special place in the hearts of Inland Empire residents, and there are not a whole heck of a lot of places like it. From the aforementioned history to the atmosphere inside. There was some type of renovation. Ownership changed hands in 2002, and so the property was given something of an upgrade. But when you are on property, the old rustic style is still very much in the air and definitely part of the appeal. So if you find yourself in the Cook and you're interested in a historic, fantastic meal, check out the Sycamore Inn in Rancho Cucamonga. And now we've reached our number 1 selection on our list of the best vintage restaurants in Southern California that are actually worth your valuable time. And when I was contemplating what should go in the number 1 spot, there was an obvious choice. I'll be candid and say, that there was only one I was ever locked in on. And that, of course, is Langer'S Deli. This Westlake miracle has been around since 1947. Al and Rose Langer began selling heavenly pastrami sandwiches to customers living in downtown and on the fringes of downtown. This was not their first foray into the culinary game, but this business, Langer'S, obviously captured their heart and their imagination, and that is why it lives long even today. This is one of the more popular delis in the entire city. I would argue it is the most popular deli in the city of Los Angeles. And you know what? Going out on a limb here, if it's the most popular deli in LA, I'm going to say it's the most popular deli in the entire Southern California region. And there is a big reason why. The number 19 sandwich. You are talking about hot pastrami, coleslaw, a slice of Swiss cheese, Russian dressing on hot rye bread. And the proportion of all of those ingredients is something that belongs in the Smithsonian Museum. I don't know how, after all these years and the millions of sandwiches that inevitably have been made, they still offer the same scientific level perfection proportioned sandwiches. It's really a marvel of some kind. And while the business may have began in a, let's say, transitioning neighborhood at the time of its founding, by the early 80s, 90s, 2000s, etc., I would not call Westlake the safest area in town. And yet, there it sits, like a beacon in the light, Langer'S on 7th and Alvarado. This is the kind of sandwich that all your friends back east would argue about. Okay, yeah, Katz's, Russ and Daughters, okay. Yeah, there are some other delis that can hold their own. But your humble correspondent is going out on a limb to tell you that Langer'S number 19 sandwich is the best deli sandwich in the country. So when any discussion arises about old school restaurants and vintage eateries, Langer'S needs to be firmly ensconced at the top of that list. As it is here, I couldn't think of a better note to go out on than celebrating the wonder, the majesty that is the Langer'S number 19 sandwich. Okay, that does it for another wonderful episode here with your gang at Living in the Sprawl podcast. Don't forget, we now have an email address, so please write to us. Any suggestions, concepts for episodes, or even if you just want to interface with my lovely producer and I on some of these topics. We would love to hear from any and all of you, and you can reach us by email at livinginthesprawlpodcast@gmail.com. Find the Instagram at Living in the Sprawl Podcast. More updates coming soon. We definitely want to make this a communal thing, to engage with our fans, and I see no signs of stopping. So, as we turn the page here on another great examination into the sprawl that is Southern California, we want to thank you for listening, and on behalf of my lovely and talented fiance producer of mine, Lisa Lowe, I am your humble correspondent. My name is Jon Steinberg. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.